Hello everyone and welcome to Teach Me Tuesdays. I, of course, am your host, Ursinity. I'm here with teachling Beedub. Hello, Beedub.
Hello.
All right, and today's a very special episode. We're going to be talking about mid because B has a 1v1 mid tournament she's participating in and hopefully winning, but that remains to be seen. And so we're going to be going all about mid today. Well, you know, you got to come in with, I suppose if you're coming in with low expectations, you know, what's that phrase? They say if you have low expectations, it's easy to pass them. But if you have high expectations, you're bound to fail. Something like that.
I'm going in kind of thinking this will be like a good learning experience and will actually like make me learn mid rather than being like, oh, I don't need to know it. And then when I do have to play mid because everyone's chosen, you know, all the other roles, and I'm like, well, crap, like I have no idea what I'm doing. So this will be a good kind of like forcing me actually to learn how to play it semi-decently, hopefully.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people have that interaction, right? I feel like in Dota, there's a pretty solid, stratification between mid players and everybody else, where mid players are a very specific kind of player, and they know they want to play mid every game, and they're down to do it, and they want to watch replays, and they want to study. And then you have, like, you know, everybody else that's just like, you know, I'd like to play carry, or I'd like to play whatever. And even if you main a role, so to speak, definitely I would say nothing is like how serious mid players are when it comes to role specificity. So a lot of people have that, like, they just assume somebody else is going to play mid. So on the rare occasion they do have to play mid, they're just like, oh God, what am I doing? I'm building all the wrong items. I don't know how to manage creep equilibrium. Like, theoretically, I know how to do this, but in practice, there's a lot of elements going on.
Yeah, that's definitely me.
Personally, I quite enjoy mid. I don't play it a ton at the moment, but it is like my preferred roles. Like, my favorite role is 5 and my second favorite role is 2, which is, I would say, fairly uncommon among players' preferences in terms of being both a 5 and a 2. Yeah. But I enjoy mid, and one of the big reasons I've become disillusioned with mid in the last couple of years has been I enjoy the 1v1 aspect of mid and the mind games and the like mechanical differences and all that. And so ever since roamers became a thing, or, you know, roamers have always been a thing, but roamers have become a more consistent thing in like every single game that doesn't have a jungler. Now mid is a little less fun for me. So that kind of has sullied my mid experience. That being said, I'm still fairly confident in my mid, so that's what we'll be studying today. Before we go into mid, though, let's just talk, how's your last couple weeks in Dota been? Because obviously we didn't have a Teach Me Tuesday last week because Cypher's made his announcement. Yeah. And then the week before that was Peachy and Proud, right? So yes. How have your last however many weeks been?
They've been okay. I would say it's been kind of like half and half. Like, I haven't been playing that much safe lane, because I think whenever I've been playing, it's been with a stack of other people. So, and usually safe lane is kind of the role which is most contested for in my regular stack. So I haven't been playing too much. I've been playing like a whole load of random people, which is fine, but I feel like it's kind of that thing where I'm playing lots of people, but haven't necessarily played them for a while, maybe. Like, I've been playing Bounty Hunter recently. Yeah, like I've played Bounty Hunter a couple of times. I don't know why. Like, no, I'm not sure. Although Spirit Breaker is now like my new favorite hero, 100%. Oh yeah, Spirit Breaker is so much fun. It works with absolutely anything. Like, it's just great all around. I feel like I haven't had a Spirit Breaker game where I'm like, oh, this was such a terrible choice. Always a good choice.
Yeah, if there's one hero I'm always happy to have on my team, it's a Spirit Breaker. I legitimately cannot think of a game where I'm like, oh, darn, somebody picked Spirit Breaker. Yeah. It's like a hero that he's globally effective, or globally threatening at the very least. He can roam from level 1 because he has like 750 health and like 6 armor. Yeah. And then he also has stuns. He has a BKB piercing stun ult. He like has everything that I want in a 4, and he's easy to execute. Spirit Breaker is like one of my good friends in real life, really my only real life friend that plays Dota still. He climbed to 5K, and the bulk of it was just playing Spirit Breaker. Oh, really? It was just every game he'd play Spirit Breaker, and if Spirit Breaker was banned, he'd play Treant Protector. And he climbed like 800 MMR from like whatever it was, like 4,200 to 5K. Oh, amazing. Just doing that. Yeah, so God, I can't do that, but I love Spirit Breakers on my team. I suck at Spirit Breaker. That's actually not entirely true. Spirit Breaker, a lot of the bad things in my Dota play are made much worse when I play heroes like Spirit Breaker or Axe. I will say that much. I'm not a divey kind of player, so I do not excel when I'm playing Spirit Breaker or Axe or any of those kind of heroes. So anyway,
I would definitely say Spirit Breaker is my first kind of divey hero that I have been playing and been finding success on. Like, I've only played 11 games of him, but I've got like an 81% win rate right now, so I'm like winning most of the ones with that. I think it's just because like maybe people at my level don't really know how to deal with him, because he just like comes charging in and everyone's like, oh no, what do we do? And then I'm just this is so much fun. I could go on for hours talking about that though.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Spirit Breaker is one of the best pub heroes in large part because he forces things to happen. And in pubs, you know, the classic joke or the classic example is you have your mid standoff where it's 5 heroes on Radiant standing in the mid lane on their side, and then 5 heroes from the Dire standing in on their side. And nobody's there to force any issues, but Spirit Breaker forces stuff to happen. You know, you're playing Spirit Breaker, you just ping somebody, and you know either you're going to die or that guy's going to die, and that's it. Yeah. Like, you just got to make stuff happen. So Spirit Breaker is really good at that, and like just forcing stuff to happen in pubs, I think is a very big, very helpful aspect to any hero. And being tanky is doubly helpful, right? Yeah. Okay. So I suppose my first Beedub specific question before we get into the overall mid mechanics and mid matchups, etc., is what prevents you from playing mid? Like you were saying, in stacks, a lot of times safe lane is the contested role. I feel like I have a similar experience because a lot of people avoid playing mid because they think, oh, you know, I don't practice it enough, or I don't, you know, do X, Y, or Z enough. So what's your hang up on why you don't gravitate towards mid?
I think there's always a pressure on that, like, you're expected to kind of rotate and gank other lanes. Well, I mean, okay. Well, first of all, I would say that my last hitting isn't the best. It's definitely something I'm like working on. So like, but I think that kind of carries into other roles as well. Like, that's just that is just a problem I have with Dota. Yeah. But I would say like, you're expected in mid to gank other lanes, and you kind of get called out if you're not doing it, and then someone else is losing their lane. And I think there just seems to be a lot of pressure on mid. Yeah. I don't know. Like, there just seems like if you lose mid, it's like, oh, we lost mid, GG. Even though, like, arguably you could say, like, you know, safe lane is probably just as important. But if someone loses their safe lane, then they can say, oh, our mid didn't rotate. Like, that's why we lost it. Yeah, they can blame the supports or whatever. Yeah. Whereas, I never know kind of like when I should leave lane, whether I should stay there, because it's the kind of like, do I leave and try and kill someone, or do I stay and try and get that experience and gold? Yeah. And then there's kind of runes added into the mix, and I'm like, do I get a bottle? I don't know. Yeah. Do you think an element of it, and this is one other element that I feel like I've heard from other people, is that mid has very specific heroes that are mid heroes, and and players that do not commonly play mid then also on top of that don't play those heroes. So then only when they're in a game, not only are they playing a role they're uncomfortable with, but they're also playing a hero that they're not practiced on, and it's just like all these extra elements that are just compounding on one another and making it very inaccessible role for people that do not actively try to play it. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, because I don't play really the standard mid heroes really anywhere, just because like they're not played anywhere else, so why would I? Yeah, or like I suppose another good example is maybe you play one mid hero and it's like, all right, I play TA, and it's like, well, the enemy team is Ember mid, so the one mid hero that I play loses this matchup, and I can't play like a better mid, so I'm just screwed. Like, I feel like that's definitely one of the many issues that prevents people from playing mid. Yeah, 100%. So the goal for today's episode, we're not going to be talking about mid in terms of post-laning phase, you know, rotating and whatnot. We're not really going to be talking about anything other than
the standard 1v1 mechanical elements, judging matchups. We're going to be talking about starting itemization and in-lane itemization, but we're not going to be going into, the grand scheme of things. We're just going to be focusing on mid mechanics. And we'll talk a bit about roamers, but roamers kind of throw too many elements into the ring. So we're trying to boil it down to the core mechanics of a 1v1 mid matchup and how one goes about mentally and strategically and mechanically playing that matchup. So, all right, from the get-go, I would say the first thing to look at in mid is your matchup specifically. One of the big things in that people have been talking about on Twitter, like pro players and high-tier pub players, is that second pick has a big advantage just in pubs. If you're playing if you're playing second pick, you have last pick, and you also get to react to the first pick. So there's no disadvantages to getting second pick in a pub, other than, I guess, the other team gets Necrophos first, but then you counter it, and who cares? So this is particularly applicable for specific matchups in that the mid matchup, a lot of times you'll wait and pick your mid hero fifth. But if you are, let's say, the Radiant team and you had first pick, that means you're picking your mid ninth. The 10th pick is going to the Dire team, so they get to counterpick you.
Yeah.
So the advantage of counterpick is they get to pick an advantageous matchup, right? So using the example that I brought up earlier, if the enemy team has just revealed their last pick was a TA, and maybe TA is good against all the other heroes on your team, right? It's good against your supports because she can nuke them down. It's good against your carry because he doesn't have incremental damage, and, whatever about the offlane, I don't know. But then the enemy team, they say, all right, I don't care how good the TA game this was. Now it's a terrible TA game. I just picked Ember Spirit or I just picked Viper. And suddenly, your matchup is absolutely horrendous. And your TA that was meant to snowball is just shafted, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So let's get a little bit into, just from the get-go, you want to establish what your goals are in a given matchup. So right away, ideally, you should know what the enemy mid-hero is. Like we talked about earlier, mid-heroes are generally only mid-heroes or are rarely elsewhere. So a hero like Ember Spirit is, probably, let's say, 80% of the time, 90% of the time a mid-hero. Occasionally he's run safe lane. But if you see an Ember Spirit on the enemy team, odds are he's going to be mid, right? TA is probably a simpler example where TA is essentially 100% going to be mid in games, right? Unless it's like all random or something and, you get a jungle TA or some nonsense. So right from the pick screen, you should be saying, right, I either A, have a good matchup, or B, have a bad matchup. I suppose C, if you have a neutral matchup, like sometimes you just trade farm. If you're playing like, if you're playing like OD Sniper, you are going to trade farm, right? The OD can't punish the sniper. The sniper can punish the OD, but it's hard to actually kill them. So odds are you're probably going to trade farm. OD wins most matchups by a hair's breadth. So yeah, so that's, I suppose the less exciting third matchup, in which case you just both farm and then, you hope you get rotations and win. Let's just start with a good matchup, for example. If you have a ideal or a strong mid matchup using TA, since we've been talking about her a lot and she's one of my better mids. One of TA's best matchups, and one of the things you'll see TA as a counterpick for, is if the enemy team has an SF, right? So if the enemy team in a pub, they say, all right, we're going to pick an SF mid, then you respond, you say, all right, they have SF, what do I pick to have an advantageous matchup? I pick TA. TA is a common counter to mid SF because he does not have incremental damage, and the thing she's worried about is incremental damage, right? So if you try to aggro on an SF and you are a Dragon Knight, you're going to take 3 raises to the face, or at least 1 or 2, depending on how good his aim is. And if you are a TA, though, you take all that and it just doesn't matter because it just burns refraction charges and whatever. And this SF has now not done hundreds and hundreds of damage to you, and you're enabled to get on top of him. Yeah. Also, he's a relatively slow hero, so you can punish that when you have level 6 and you hit your like kill potential timing and whatnot. So this good matchup, essentially, you have established, right from the get-go, unless one player is vastly better than the other, I'm going to win this matchup. So by establishing that right at pick screen, you then have to approach the lane and say, all right, since I know I have a good matchup, what are my goals going to be? and how do I abuse the fact that I have a strong matchup. So in these strong matchups, what you want to do is either say, if you have a kill matchup, like TASF, you have a pretty good kill potential on the SF. Maybe a better example of a lane that has a lot of kill potential would be something like, if you're playing, if you're playing Ursa against like Dragon Knight, you have great kill potential on the Dragon Knight as the Ursa because you're just always in his face and you can keep him low, and then you get one quick rotation or one good rune or one good, even just like you get your phase boots timing and then you just run at him and he dies. So you need to assess whether you have really good kill potential or whether you just have pressure potential. Pressure potential, basically the way I think about it is that if you know the enemy mid cannot kill you, like let's say an SF is going to have a really hard time killing a TA unless he has a lot of rotations, you can play super aggressive on this person, right? So that's where you get into mechanics that we'll go into later, like double waving, where you just force the issue and you force the SF under tower, and then you take his tower early, you bully him under tower, you basically force him to be on the back foot, so to speak, and it puts you on the front foot, and it puts you in a very aggressive position where you are dictating how the lane goes.
Okay.
One of the other things specifically, a lot of this is hero specific. That's why, you kind of have to talk in generalities, unfortunately. One of the other things is you might not necessarily have kill potential, but you have to then factor in for your roamers. So let's say you're playing TA and you have a Spirit Breaker, great kill potential. If you're playing TA and your 4 is like a Night Stalker, still good kill potential. If you're playing TA and your 4 is something weird, it's like, I have like a 4 Lich. It's like, well, I don't really have kill potential with a 4 Lich. Like, he's a defensive support. This is just awkward, whatever. He secures me, but I'm not going to kill anybody. So if you don't have that kill potential, you don't want to waste your time trying to go for it. You just want to secure as much farm by being aggressive and playing on that front foot. On that note, one of the other advantages of having a good matchup is if you're playing a matchup and you have the potential to just take a tower early and then rotate to other lanes. Like, let's say you're playing Puck and you can just push out waves super fast with all your spell damage, and then just take the tower early. Let's say you get a DD rune and like it times out well with a catapult wave or something. If you can take the tower early, that's another thing. But again, you have to assess from the get-go, is my matchup going to allow me to take this tower, or is it going to allow me to kill this person, or is it going to allow me to just play aggressively if you have from the get-go determined it is a good matchup, right? One of the other big advantages, talking about TASF specifically, is to notice how the matchup hero-specific works, in that if you are the TA, or rather, if you are the SF and you're getting pressured by a TA, if you can't farm that lane because TA is abusing you and she's just like using traps and dealing a ton of damage to you, you're going to go jungle, right? So from the TA's perspective, this SF is going to run away and jungle some stacks that, let's say, one of his supports has made for him. And you are going to take his tower early and abuse the fact that he left to jungle. So you now have perfect CS in lane. You've taken his tower. You've basically debilitated their map, because the mid tower is arguably the most potential, or is the most important tower for map control, especially in the early to mid game. So essentially that's like the ballpark, right? So ideally you're picking into a good matchup. You have to assess what is good about this matchup and then abuse it, right? So what mid heroes specifically do you prefer? And then let's think of some ways that you have advantageous matchups, I suppose.
So if I go mid, I either play Viper, just because he seems to be great.
He's easy
at the moment, and he's easy.
And he wins most matchups.
Yeah.
Or at least ties.
Yeah, so I would play Viper. Sniper's another one that I think I've played him a couple of times. I've played... Death Prophet is one that I pick, like... She's the one, if I have to go mid, I'm like, oh, can I play Death Prophet here? Just because, like, when I first started playing Dota, she was the hero that I learnt Dota with, pretty much.
Okay.
Which is kind of weird. Like, I mean, if I was playing... I mean, I learnt Dota with Lich, like, playing in, like, stacks with friends and stuff. But when I wasn't, and if I was going in a game by myself, or the hero I'd practice in bot matches was always Death Prophet. So I think she kind of has, like... For some reason, she's kind of, like, ingrained in my brain that I'm like, oh, Death Prophet, she's a mid hero, I could play that. But she's kind of difficult and very situational and yeah, I don't know, great for taking towers and stuff and team fights and things, but like, I don't know, she's a bit iffy.
So let's like basically use Death Prophet as an example. So let's say you're picking Death Prophet. Mm-hmm. If you're picking Death Prophet, her, quote unquote good matchups are matchups where the enemy is a what's it called, a melee hero.
Yeah.
So you can abuse them with Spirit Siphon, and you have the constant harass from Crypt Swarm, and you are and potentially let's say you have 1 point silence, and it's like what? It's like 4 seconds level 1. It's something ridiculous like that. Maybe 5 seconds. 1 second, I'm looking it up just for the sake of it. Yes, 3 seconds of level 1, 3, and then it scales up to 6. So let's say you're playing Death Prophet against a Dragon Knight. You, from the get-go, know, all right, I have a good matchup because he's a melee hero, and I can just run at him with Spirit Siphon. He's slow also. I build phase boots, so I'm just going to try to capitalize on this matchup as much as possible. Yeah. And then going through what our checklist was earlier, deciding do you have a kill lane, do you have a kill lane, do you have a pressure lane, or do you have a tower taking lane? Playing Death Prophet, you have a tower taking lane, right? You have good kill potential also, just because this matchup is so one-sided. But regardless of the matchup, regardless of the good matchup, you're going to have tower taking potential. Because right when you hit 6, you get your exorcism. Yeah. Some people I've seen stagger exorcism, and they get like they don't get exorcism until like 8 or so, but that's uncommon. Okay. I don't play a ton of Death Prophet recently. I used to play a ton of her actually. She used to be one of my go-to mids, but recently I'm not a fan ever since they reworked her. Even though she's way better since the rework. Yeah. But anyway, so you are going to say, all right, I want to take this tower as soon as possible. So the way you play that matchup is you put them on the back foot, just keep using that term, by siphoning the melee hero, and then you're spamming out waves. When you have them under the tower, one of the big things that is helpful about playing on this aggressive stage is that if you're playing a mid that builds a bottle like a Death Prophet, if you're under your tower, it's really hard to go get a rune, right? But if you're on top of the enemy tower, you can say, all right, I'm just going to get a rune, because you have effectively taken full control mobility-wise of that lane, right? They might see you going to that rune, but there's no possible way, unless they're like a Quap with a blink, they can get ahead of you. And if it's a Quap with a blink, she blinks ahead of you, she no longer has her mobility spell, and then you just kill her. Okay. So you, by double waving them, or just by pushing aggressively, or however you want to aggress on them, whether it's spamming out spells or just right-clicking, like if you're playing Lina, you just right-click the enemy mid, and they just can't do anything. Like, you have 675 range or whatever. Like, what are they going to possibly do against that? So, as long as you're playing aggressively, you have the option to go get runes, and then use those runes to further your lead, right? People used to always complain back in the day when runes were available at minute 0. If you got a minute 0 rune that was a double damage rune, you just won mid, just default. Like, it was absolutely stupid. Like, it was not skillless, but it took a lot of the skill out of mid lane, where it's just like, oh, I just lost because the enemy, like, I'm playing a neutral matchup. Like, I'm playing, I don't know, Storm Dragon Knight, and it's not super good for either. You just trade farm, and then Dragon Knight takes the tower at 6, and Storm can't kill you because you have 1100 health or whatever. But that neutral matchup becomes not neutral because you get 1 DD rune at minute 0. Even though that is an extreme example that doesn't exist anymore, thank God. That still exists now, in that if you are winning a matchup, but then the enemy team gets a good rune, suddenly that matchup gets, a little neutralized, right? You have a big damage advantage because you went double null on Death Prophet, and they have, a sniper that has 43 base damage and 1 Wraith Band. He gets a DD rune, suddenly your advantages are all nullified, right? So having that aggressive play potential allows you to then further your lead by getting rune control, and then getting good runes and taking tower, or using a regen rune, going for kills, etc. Yeah. So specifically on Death Prophet, would you, as soon as I get 6, should I push the wave, push the lane, and then ult on the tower and try and do something? Because that's actually something I'll kind of be like, oh, should I wait maybe, or
I'm not really sure what I'm waiting for though. I think this is my problem. I'm very uncertain about the whole thing. And so like as soon as I get my 6 on DP, should I push the lane into their tower, ult, deal a load of damage and kind of upset them a bit?
Yeah, so Death Prophet specifically, her ult, and one of the big reasons why she's not a super popular hero is that her ult has a super long cooldown. Her ult cooldown's 145 seconds?
Yeah, it's
and
long.
that means it's super committal, right? So using, like, Dragon Knight is another example of a pushing mid, right? Dragon Knight, his ult, I don't even know the cooldown. It's something like 60 seconds or whatever. So he can pretty non-committally push a lane. Death Prophet, usually, if you hit 6 or maybe you wait till 7, what I try to do is I say, all right, I have ult now. I would like to push this tower. And then you get somebody to rotate into your lane. You go for a kill, and then you push the tower.
Okay.
Or maybe you don't kill them. You just push them out of lane, and then suddenly you take the tower anyway, right? So you're basically doubling down on the efficacy of your ult. Like, not only are you getting a kill or at least getting the enemy out of lane, but you're also getting the tower or getting damage on the tower, however. Okay. You're getting more out of it than just ulting and getting a single kill or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's generally the goal on Death Prophet. You say, all right, my 4 is a Spirit Breaker because he's in every game, so let's use him as the example. I want Spirit Breaker to gank the enemy sniper. Then you run at him, you run him down. You're 6, so you probably have, let's say, like Null, Bottle, and like Brown Boots, maybe a second Null, maybe Phase. It depends if you went for the second Null or not. Yeah. Usually I would because I like to build Veil on Death Prophet. And then, you just spam with the wave, you use your ult, you take the kill, or if you don't get the kill, whatever. The primary goal is the tower. Kills in the early game are, other than First Blood, obviously, are a little overrated. Like, they're very good just through what they actually do for the game, but the actual gold you get from the kill is less important than debilitating the enemy, mid laner or safe laner or whatever, and preventing them from farming for a few waves and making them lose XP and building your advantage.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if you have a good matchup, you want to be taking tower around level 6 or level 7. Another big point that you can try to synergize with is try to take tower after you get a good rune. So let's say you're 6, you don't really have an opportunity immediately. Then it hits, 8 minutes, and suddenly, you just got a DD rune, or you got an illusion rune, what have you. Then now you can play a lot more aggressively and, tank the tower with your illusion runes, or, deal a bunch of damage with double damage rune, whatever.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to synergize your ult because it's such a commitment, because it has such a long cooldown. You want to get something out of it, because if you waste it, potentially you can lose like the next fight, and then suddenly your whole mid game is lost because your Death Prophet wasted an ult.
That is so sad.
So yeah, it's a bit committal.
When you waste an ult, and then you're just like, oh, what have I done? And now I'm just like punished for ages. Was it 145 seconds or something? Just like,
yeah, it's a bit much.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, on our last Theorycraft Thursday, we had a really bad Death Prophet on our team, and it was a very good example of exactly what I'm talking about, where she just like wasted 2 ults, and it was like, oh, you wasted 1 ult, so we just lost two more fights or something. It's like, and the cooldown doesn't go down. Like, you build an Octarine naturally, and I believe she has a talent for, she has a 10% cooldown reduction talent. It gets a little better, but it's still long. Like, you only get it down to like 100 seconds, which is still pretty darn long. So, yes.
It is very good, though, so I can see why it's so long.
Yeah, so that's all the intricacy when you are assessing a good matchup. Snow, do you have any other questions about playing a good matchup before we go into what you do if you play a bad matchup?
No, I don't think so. Not right now. Nothing comes to mind.
All right, good. It's always, like, when I've done mid-coaching and stuff like that, it's always hard because it is very hero-specific, and a lot of little intricate stuff that is hard to explain, in an hour on a podcast. But playing good matchups, basically, you just need to abuse the fact that they're good. That's, if you want to summarize it in one sentence, just say, all right, I have a good matchup. It's good because of X, and I'm going to abuse that. Bam, done.
Yeah.
I deal more damage than them, therefore I'm going to trade with them. I have a pushing ability, and they don't have wave clear. I'm going to push them. Whatever. Just abuse that.
Yeah,
so,
I would say, like, my problem in terms of it's like knowing whether it is a good matchup or not, just because I'm really not that familiar with mid heroes, really. And so I would say, like, the problem with that is I'm always kind of like, what kind of, so you were saying, like, so you were saying, like, if you have wave clear versus the other hero, that gives you kind of a point, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at all the pros of your heroes and look at all the cons of your hero. And if you have more pros, this is actually a really bad way of explaining it. Basically, you just have to look at what you're good at and what the enemy is weak to. And if what you're good at is what they're weak to, it's a great matchup. Yeah. So if the enemy mid is a TA and you're playing Venomancer, she is weak to incremental damage. You deal a ton of incremental damage. Bam, simple. That's a good matchup. Yeah. If you're playing Death Prophet, you're looking to play against melee heroes or short-range heroes and abuse them with Spirit Siphon and get a lot of harass out. If the enemy hero is a short-range hero or a melee hero, that is a good matchup. Similarly, if you're playing Death Prophet and the enemy hero is super evasive and you can't Spirit Siphon, then that matchup becomes worse. And if you have enough cons and enough bad parts to a matchup, suddenly that good matchup becomes a bad matchup. See, I mean, there are a lot of very specific things that are hard to kind of encapture and are very hero specific. But the broad stroke of it all is just analyzing what are they good at, what are they bad at, what am I good at, and what am I bad at? Or I suppose what am I good at versus what I'm weak to, and what they're weak to versus what they're good at. And then saying, all right, can I win this matchup? If it's a good matchup, why is it good? And, just breaking it down to its simplest parts, I suppose.
So the two most common mids I see at my level is Viper and Sniper. So if they were against each other, who do you think is the more powerful in lane?
Viper. So I would say, having played that matchup a few times, because I used to play a lot of Sniper. Viper definitely wins that matchup. So Viper wins a lot of matchups because his early laning is super, super strong. Yeah. But if you are playing a Viper and you don't abuse the fact that your early laning is really, really strong and you get put on the back foot somehow, then you're suddenly super, super weak. So a good example would be, sorry, to answer your question, the Viper wins that matchup because he takes advantage early by, let's say oh God, I was about to draw on my desk. If you can think of I wish I had like a whiteboard, but that doesn't really translate to podcasting very well. Yeah. If you think of the mid lane, just by thinking there's a river and then the two sides, if the Radiant team is the Viper and the Dire team is the Sniper, if the creeps are meeting directly in the center, let's say like the absolute perfect 50-50 equilibrium, the Viper can play aggressively because Sniper deals like 43 damage or whatever at level 1. I think it is actually 43. And then he has a Wraith Band, so it's up to 52, plus or minus a few points. The Sniper hits the Viper, and the Viper hits the Sniper, and the Viper comes out ahead. And the Sniper's primary mechanic is that he's really long range, right? But he doesn't start long range. He only gets long range because of take aim. And so what the Viper does is early on, the Viper basically plays aggressively, and to coin a basketball term, he sets a pick and he just slaps the Sniper around for a while. Then the Sniper is so behind and is not able to access the lane, and the Viper is not really punished because the Sniper does still a little damage and the Viper is naturally pretty tanky. Similarly, like a bad Viper matchup, Viper has pretty low damage as well, but he gets a lot of his damage based on his orb effect and his passive. Yeah. And so if the Viper is like a level 1 and the enemy mid is, let's say the enemy mid is like a Shadow Fiend, and the Viper should have won that matchup early, but the Viper doesn't take advantage, then suddenly you see the Shadow Fiend just wave clearing, right? The Shadow Fiend just spamming raises, kills creep waves in just a couple spells, and then goes in jungles. The Viper can't deal with all the creeps under the tower, and the Viper cannot take advantage of the Viper's strength because the Viper didn't play that lane matchup early on, and now is being abused because his weakness is that he does not have wave clear, whereas a lot of mids do have wave clear. Similarly, I suppose the Sniper could be spamming shrapnels, killing creep waves, and keeping the Viper at bay because of that, and stopping the Viper from playing aggressively because he's so put back because he's under his tower and he can't play aggressively.
Yeah. Okay.
But in general, Viper's super, super strong. Yeah. It's just that you need to play very play very forward. And he's very hard to punish because if you attack him, you get slowed. So if you try to kill a Viper early and he has boots and you have boots, you know, who cares? He's he's a slow hero, but he's still faster than you, so he just walks away. He has decent armor and he's pretty tanky. So yeah, that's that.
Okay.
Let's go into bad matchups, basically. So we talked a lot about good matchups. Bad matchups, similarly, you need to assess this from the beginning. And I feel like a lot of us lie to ourselves when we look at matchups and say, oh, you know, I can win this. And I myself am super guilty of this. I find myself, I should say less that I find myself doing this in the moment, but I find myself doing this after the game where I'm like, man, this is not a winning matchup, but I tried to win it anyway, and then I just died. And I just fed a bunch. So the example that I would use, and the example that definitely is most apt, is the TA versus Ember Spirit matchup. Like I say, I play a lot of TA. Ember Spirit sucks to play against TA. One time on a podcast, I said that it wasn't that bad of a matchup, and nobody corrected me on it. Nobody sent me DMs, but I knew afterwards, I was like, that was the stupidest thing I've ever said on a podcast. So that's the most objectively wrong thing I've ever said. But I was like, theoretically, I know how to play that matchup. And then I forget if it was even in that episode, but I lose that matchup. Like today I won it, but that was only because I it was all random, and the enemy mid randomed Ember Spirit, and I randomed TA, and I was like, right, this is like one of my best mid heroes, and I randomed it, and you randomed a hero you can't play. Yeah. So that's the only reason I won that, because they did not know how to press their advantages, and I knew how to mitigate for what my weaknesses were. Mm-hmm. They get a point of sleight of fist early, which is just the most utter nonsense. But yeah, so thinking about the many wrong things I've said on podcasts before, essentially what you want to do when you have a bad matchup is not assume you can figure your way out of it in terms of turning a bad matchup into a good matchup. Mm-hmm. It is very rare, unless you vastly outskill the enemy player, that you will just turn a bad matchup and then suddenly win it. The way that you win a bad matchup, more often than not, if you're both at equal skill, is you just tie out the lane, so to speak. So basically, you don't allow them to abuse their advantages and your weaknesses, and you just farm, they just farm. You know, you can't really stop them from farming in most really bad matchups, but you just tie out the lane. You say, right, you know, you might get a few more CS than me. This might be hard for me, but you figure your way out of it and get farm anyway. Rather than feeding and trying to do aggressive things like I might do playing the TA versus Ember Spirit matchup, right? So using that, also, I mean, the cop-out answer for this is ask your 4 to rotate, and then sure, you can win that matchup. You know, you can win any matchup if your 4 rotates enough and their 4 doesn't. But that's not really productive coaching advice. But I know somebody's listening to this while they run or at work and is like, oh, well, you just need your Spirit Breaker to rotate. And it's like, yeah, well... That's the answer to everything, is you just need your Spirit Breaker to rotate. Yeah. So
sometimes you don't have a Spirit Breaker.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you have like a jungle LC or whatever, and you just gotta, you gotta play the hand you're dealt.
Oh my god. That reminds me of a game that we played today. Like, it was so bad. I probably shouldn't go into it, but they were like they wanted to jungle LC, and we didn't. Like classic, no one wanted to play mid, and we were like, we need a mid, and they played Zeus, and it was just terrible. They were just ulting all the time just to get vision of where they were, even though we could see a couple of them, and it was just like
should have played mid LC. LC is legit.
Oh really?
I like it. Yeah, it's one of my favorite mids at the moment, but
interesting.
I was actually spamming it a while back. It's not common.
I never would have thought that LC would make a good mid.
It's really hard to play against. Attacker, the famous Kunkka player, I saw him play it first, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then I was playing it for a while, and then Growdy was like, oh, I've been playing this mid LC, it's great. And I was like, oh, you too? And he does this weird Echo Saber thing, and I don't know if he still does it, but God bless Growdy. Yeah, it's uncommon mid, but it's actually pretty strong, and it wins a lot of matchups that you would find difficult otherwise. And it has pretty good kill potential. But I won't go too deeply into it. Yeah. It definitely has a weird tempo that if you're not familiar with it, you could definitely feed if you play LC mid. That's for sure. It does not play itself. Okay, so if you have a bad matchup, you need to, from the get-go, just like we talked about with good matchups, assess that and say, all right, I'm playing TA versus Ember. I know this is a bad matchup, and I need to play accordingly, right? Mm-hmm. Don't just play like any matchup. Realize that is bad, and then play, essentially, the broad stroke is you just play more safely. And the way you play more safely is usually just to focus on securing farm from your side of the river.
Yeah.
So if the equilibrium is really bad for you and it's past the river, let's say again you're playing Radiant and the enemy playing Dire, you want to be playing on your side as much as humanly possible. And when the equilibrium gets bad, you need to play super safely. Ideally, you have like an uphill ward, which allows you to play even more safely. But you need to be aware that you are totally potentially dead, or you can totally potentially be almost dead and be, kicked out of lane.
Yeah.
And play super carefully because of that. Whereas if you're playing a really good matchup, you can really kind of relax. And unless the 4 tries to rotate on you, maybe you die. But if you have a good matchup, you can aggress quite a bit more. The nice thing is that since when you're in a good matchup, usually you're playing it more aggressively. That means the equilibrium will generally be in your favor if you are on the bad side of the matchup, so to speak. So you want to play safely. You want to be securing as much farm as possible. And essentially, like I said earlier, you're trying to tie out the lane, right? You're trying not to die. You don't want to lose your tower early, and you want to get as much farm as humanly possible despite how weak your hero matchup is. And you don't want to be engaging in 1v1 fights. Even if you get a good rune, which again is not going to be common because the enemy team is naturally going to have control of runes just because of them having map control, or lane control, I suppose. You need to, if you get a DD rune, maybe you figure it out, but that's not going to be very common.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing, is just playing safely. One of the other larger aspects of this is, and it kind of goes hand in hand with assessing why a matchup is bad for you, is assessing what the enemy team's windows are, right? So there are 2 kinds of windows I commonly think about. There are kill windows, which is saying, oh, they're playing Ember Spirit, they hit a power peak at level 6, he's going to try to kill me. Or, oh, they're playing Lina, she's level 7, she suddenly becomes way better at clearing waves, and she's going to try to take my tower. Or, using any other example, right? A Shadow Fiend hits level 5, he's level 3 Raze, and suddenly he's pushing waves super hard, right? You need to assess and realize, okay, their matchup is good, and it's particularly good in this window where they try to take my tower, or they try to kill me, or, really those are the only 2 things that happen in general.
Yeah.
So assess exactly what their window is, and then be very conscious of that. One of the big things in mid matchups, especially in tied matchups, like that Viper Sniper matchup, like let's say you're just trading farm, whichever mid hits 6 first or hits their window first has the chance to abuse that window and win the matchup that was otherwise not totally won. So if you are playing an even matchup and you got an extra couple denies and you are 6 before the enemy's 6 and you use Viper Strike and you kill them, suddenly your matchup is won, basically, because you now have gotten all this extra XP from the kill, you've gotten a few free waves, and you can relax, and you just, you had a grand old time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're the sniper in that matchup and you just died to a Viper, suddenly your decent lane is now terrible because you're getting pushed in and you have to play under tower and you're in this really awkward, bad position. Similarly, if you are playing a bad matchup and the enemy team is trying to take your tower, that's where either you ask for a rotation from somebody with a wave clear, like let's say your 5 is a Lina or your 5 is a Coddle or something. Or if they're trying to take your tower and you're a hero that has the ability to wave clear, like let's say you're playing a bad matchup and you're playing Death Prophet, they're trying to take your tower, you save up mana and realize they're going to take my tower soon, then you Crypt Swarm their wave and you abuse the fact that they're up on your side of the river and trying to take your tower, and they're basically making themselves vulnerable positionally. Yeah, I mean, it's never fun to play a bad matchup. I find that's my big hang-up as a occasional mid player, is that a lot of times I just see a matchup and I'm like, I don't want to play that. Like, I don't want to play mid this game because I picked Invoker and they picked Necrophos. And like, this is going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to play Invoker versus Necrophos. So that's one of my big hang-ups personally, as far as when I play mid. But, you got to play bad matchups.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of the situation.
What do you think of Necro mid? Like, would you say he's a good mid hero?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's his best role by far is mid. Yeah. He's really good because he wins virtually every matchup without it being difficult. Also, he's very hard to rotate on. And the common thing is for you to rotate, or is for you to call for rotations when you're losing a lane.
Yeah.
And if you call for rotations when you're losing a lane against a Necrophos, and then Necrophos gets a double kill because you tried to gank him and it didn't work out, suddenly your lane is super, super, super lost.
Yeah.
So that's Necros' big strength, is that he wins matchups and he is very good at countering the common idea for dealing with a lost matchup, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Also, his big counter is Diffusal Blade, and Diffusal Blade doesn't come out until post-laning phase.
Yeah, true.
Similarly, a lot of his counters, hero-wise, like Nyx Assassin or Pugna, don't come out or are not his counters until they have a few levels in them. Right, like Nyx is good against Necrophos because he has Spike Carapace and he has Mana Burn because Necro is a high int hero, and he has stuns and whatnot that go through his through his Ghost Veil, whatever the heck it's called, W.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean Necrophos is definitely like a standout, easy, good mid to play. It's really hard to be bad at Necrophos. Similarly, it's hard to be bad at Viper.
Yeah.
Razor, I would say it's difficult, but not as hard as the other two. But Razor is also commonly thought of as an easy mid hero.
Interesting.
Dragon Knight's probably also bundled in there, but if you're playing Dragon Knight, you're bored to death. So I don't think it's easy on any. I hate that hero. God, that's Proud's favorite, or one of Proud's favorite mid heroes, and God bless him, because I cannot I cannot play that hero just through virtue of refusal rather than skill. It's just I have no interest whatsoever in playing that hero.
I feel like I just don't see him a lot, really.
Yeah, he's boring, so a lot of people don't play him. But he's really good. Like I shouldn't say really good, but he's a good hero. Like he's not a standout, like he's not OP. But Dragon Knight, when played well and when he hits his proper timings, is incredibly difficult to play against. If he hits 6 and it's just like, oh, I'm suddenly taking 1 billion damage every time he hits me from his dot, and he's taking my tower. It's incredibly difficult to play against. And he's super tanky. He builds more tanky items. It's just incredibly oppressive to play against such a good Dragon Knight. I guess to wrap up, before you ask any more questions, but like to wrap up ideologically how I deal with bad matchups, it's a lot more hero specific and it's a lot more play specific, but the broad stroke is just play more safely and take advantage of the rare occasion where the enemy mid is missing. Yeah. So if you, like, we've been talking a lot about how if you are playing a good matchup, you take map control, you take lane control, I should say, and then you go get a rune. If you are playing from the bad perspective, the enemy team has now left to go get a rune. You have, like, let's say they have like brown boots. You have, I don't know, let's see, you have probably like 18 to 22 seconds to just get a bunch of CS. So now you have that freedom to CS and get creeps, whereas normally you're getting pressured. So you need to take advantage of those small windows where you are safe, or if you have a rotation, let's say, suddenly you're safe for the next minute and a half, you can recoup your losses. So yeah, that's playing a bad matchup. It's less intricate than playing a good matchup, because the onus, essentially, in my mind at least, the onus is always on the person who has the advantageous matchup to abuse it and play well, rather than the person playing from the bad perspective to play super stellar, because the potential is all on the good side, where the potential to make plays and like really win is all on the side of the person who has the advantageous matchup. So playing the bad matchup, you just have to not mess up, play safe, and hope the other person's bad. Yeah. Like, to make it incredibly oversimplified.
So you were talking about having a ward at mid earlier. Would you ever buy one yourself?
No.
Okay.
If I like had
if you
random
don't have
gold,
one, it's just like, oh, maybe. I don't have one. But like, would you ever buy yourself one?
I would not. I don't even like it when my supports give me one to ward myself.
Okay.
Because one of the big weakness in me buying my own ward is that I am the mid hero. So if I am CSing and suddenly I walk across the lane to place a ward, it's super obvious. And the enemy team just buys a sentry. They immediately recoup their spent money on the sentry, and like nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Like, I just fed them a ward. I wasted a ward. I wasted 65 gold. They maybe tangoed it, and now they have a double tango. Like, I've just screwed myself.
Okay.
So the only time I like to have a ward mid is either if it's a defensive ward, if I'm playing a really weak matchup, or if I'm getting rotated on a lot, it's nice to have defensive wards. Or alternatively, I like to have a ward that is not in the view of the mid lane. So if I have a support that places a rune ward, that rune ward placement was not seen by the enemy tower, and that's fine. That's a great ward. But if they ward and the tower sees it, it's just a waste.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I like to have a ward, but if I don't have one, it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy my own in general. Like, rarely do I buy my own wards if I am a mid laner or a safe laner. If I'm a safe laner, I consider it because let's say both my supports are roaming and I need to play safely. I'll buy my own ward and then place it just to be safe. But in mid lane, the lane is a lot more compact. So if you place that ward, it's a lot more obvious.
Yeah, true.
And it's a lot more consequential from both sides. So they put a lot of focus on dewarding it. Whereas if the enemy safe laner places a defensive ward, whatever. Like, okay, I guess so. Like, that's just something you deal with if you're playing from the enemy perspective.
Yeah.
Whereas mid is a lot more finicky in terms of the value of vision.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, don't do that.
Yeah, no, I don't do that. Yeah, it's like some matchups is better than others. Like if you're playing a really long range hero, like a sniper, it's really nice to have that vision because you get a little extra harass. Whereas if you're playing a melee hero, like a Dragon Knight, it's like, yeah, okay, I don't have vision. All right, okay. Like you're not gonna punish me that much. Like it's just, you know, you're gonna hit me. I have 8 armor.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't care. So yeah, I mean, some matchups is better or worse than others, but in general, I'm not too worried about it. I'd rather have a ward protecting a rune and protecting me from ganks than I would having an uphill vision.
Okay.
Like it, yeah. Okay, so we've gone over the basics, the broad strokes of both good and bad matchups. I'd like to get a bit into specifically mid mechanics. And yes, mid mechanics. I want to talk about itemization very quickly, but I don't know when to talk about it.
Okay.
So, would you rather talk about itemization now or mechanics now, I guess?
I mean, maybe mechanics. Itemization seems very
Okay, good choice.
specific on who you're playing, and so I imagine it's
Yeah,
difficult
kind of.
to be general with it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair stance. Also, right after I asked you that question, I realized that it's way better to talk about mechanics now because we were already talking about a bunch of mechanics, like double waving and stuff like that, and pushing. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to talk about mechanics now.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so the first mechanic, just since I already brought it up, that we're going to talk about is double waving. People didn't used to refer to this as double waving, but in the last few patches, probably since 7.0, since the addition of the additional melee creep, people talk a lot about double waving. And double waving is essentially spamming out, usually it's the first creep wave, but it's applicable in any creep wave, is spamming out the creep wave and forcing the enemy under tower, and then just slapping them around or enabling you to go get a rune or enabling you to hit the tower. So this is especially important in the first wave. This is one of the big reasons why a hero like Lina was very popular for a long time, is that she has the ability to push wave at level 1. Like Dragon Slave, let's see, what does... how much damage is Dragon Slave at level 1? It is 85 at level 1, and it's not a tremendous amount of damage, but it's enough damage that you can solidly push out the first wave, because what's the cooldown? It has a 8-second cooldown, which means you can get 2 out in the first wave and force the enemy under tower. And then you as Lina, with all of your range, you can then just be throwing fireballs casually at this person, and you have taken full control of this first lane, or this first little bit of the lane, and force the enemy on their back foot, and you deplete their regen by just throwing fireballs at them over and over and over again, right? And so if you're on the receiving end of that, she has long range, you're under your tower, you don't deal a lot of damage because, you're playing any mid hero at level 1. It sucks at damage. Like Shadow Fiend, he does what? He has 43 damage, I think, similar to Sniper. At level 1, you're under tower, what are you going to do? You don't have any recourse. That's why some people for a while were getting raised at level 1 on Shadow Fiend, because they just realized they're going to have a miserable time if they start with the Soul Collection spell. So yeah, double waving essentially is just forcing the enemy to be on their back foot, to put it as simply as humanly possible. And this is doubly effective at level 1 because creeps deal a lot more damage at level 1, and the enemy can't CS under tower at level 1, or at least has a much more difficult time CSing under tower at level 1. And yeah, you just punish them, and you can do a lot of different things once you're in this position, but essentially double waving puts you in an advantageous position. People didn't used to do this. It's a relatively new mechanic. It, like I said, was bolstered by the addition of the additional melee creep, because that is more of a threat damage-wise to the enemy mid laner, and also is just more hectic to deal with. But the mid lane, a lot of times people focus, myself definitely, too much on maintaining equilibrium and having perfect CS and getting denies. When in actuality, you are pretty fine not worrying about denies and just punishing the enemy hero directly. So instead of throwing a fireball on Lina to get a deny, unless it's a range creeps are super important. If you are going to throw out a fireball, you're better off dealing 50 damage to the enemy mid laner than to getting a deny and a range creep and denying just a little bit of XP. That's kind of a shift tonally that has been made in the last, year and a half or so of Dota, in that people are valuing farm and punishing the enemy mid a lot more than getting neutral equilibrium and just farming, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's double waving. It is something that sounds a lot simpler on paper than it is in practice, I find. So yeah, I would say definitely practice it. Just in some pubs or just in 1v1s with a friend. One of the nice things about mid is that you can just practice with a friend. Just say, hey, we're both 2500 MMR. Let's just play a bunch of mid games and play matchups and just work on it. It's very good to practice that way, purely mechanically. And that's where stuff like double waving, you can really see the difference, because it from level 1 screws one person incredibly. Especially if they have bad starting items, like we'll get into early, or we'll get into later. If you mess up your starting items and then you get double waved, you just lose. You just lose. If you don't have enough regen and you get double waved, suddenly you're at half health. Enemy team has full health, and sure, they wasted some mana, but mana regens, whatever. And then you've lost the entire lane because you have bad items and you got double waved. So yeah, huge value in double waving.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever heard of double waving, so good to know.
Yeah, it's you definitely see it, but you just don't know the name for it. I only learned the name, I think, because Blitz did an episode with Day 9, but it's a theory it's a mechanic, I suppose, the theory, mechanic, whatever you want to call it, that's been in play for quite a while as far as mid goes. So yeah, it just puts you in a better position to play more aggressively, and puts the enemy team on the defensive, like we've been talking about this whole episode, essentially. That you want to be setting the tone and setting the pace of the lane. Yeah. Okay. So, if you are double waved, you either have to, if you are a hero that has the ability, you can pull the lane all the way back, and then you can either CS while the tower is hitting it. So let's say you're playing a hero that has a lot of base damage, like a puck that has double null, or even just a puck with one null, like starting items. You still deal good damage. You can CS under a tower. But if you're playing something that doesn't deal a lot of damage, like a sniper, you want to just pull the lane back. That way the enemy mid is super far away from the creeps and is unable to get your creeps, and also deny their creeps, and also they can't dive and hit you because it's so far back. The other way to play it out is, if you have wave clear yourself, is to wave clear in turn. So let's say you're playing Death Prophet, the enemy team is playing Lina. Lina uses Dragon Slave to push you out. You use a Crypt Swarm to push her out, and then you just auto attack some creeps and you equal it out, and then you maintain that equilibrium rather than allowing one side or the other to take a big advantage. Yeah, that's how you don't get double waved, essentially, is you just have to spam them out better, or just auto attack. Auto attacking is not necessarily recommended, but sometimes you just got to do it just to try to equal it out and make sure that you're not going to get pushed in and just have a miserable time. Okay.
I guess that only works if you have some wave clear, though. Like if you're double waved and you don't have that, then you're kind of just screwed.
Yeah, it's a hard situation. It's a lot easier to make. Let's see. How do I explain this best before I stumble over my words? It's a lot easier to create the situation from one side than it is to get out of the situation from the other.
Okay.
So it's very easy for Alina to just line up 2 Dragon Slaves and set the tone of a lane than it is for a sniper to then react and be CSing under tower when he deals 50 damage. Right? Like, it's much harder to get out of than it is to create.
Yeah.
So that will immediately make your midding better, is if you just focus on early. If you have wave clear, just abuse them. Also, hopefully you're hitting the enemy hero with your wave clear.
Yeah.
So then you're dealing additional damage, and it creates a bad situation for the enemy entirely. Okay, so since we're on the topic of equilibrium, and equilibrium is the big thing that we always focus on as mid laners, typically. One of the big things is just establishing solid creep equilibrium in a state where you are safe and on your side of the map, but you are not underneath your tower. So you can maintain, let's say you're playing Sniper and the enemy team's playing Viper, since we talked about that matchup earlier. If the Viper doesn't have wave clear, right, so it's going to be hard for him to double wave you, his harass is going to be focused on you specifically as a hero. But let's say you're both level 5, you have a couple points in take aim as Sniper, so you're safe from him. You can, if you have the creep equilibrium on your side of the creep wave, or on your side of the river, but not under tower, you can then CS freely without having to worry about this Viper that you would have had to worry about otherwise if you were playing, let's say, aggressively. And you want to keep this equilibrium as long as humanly possible because it's allowing you to CS. And sure, he's farming, but like I said, this is a bad matchup, so you're trying to neutralize it and just farm it out, right? Mm-hmm. So you are allowed to farm right now because of this solid equilibrium, and it's really hard for them to aggress onto you, even with a 4, unless it's like a Monkey King, because you have the safety of your tower and the safety of allies TPing to your tower, potentially. So by keeping equilibrium in this state, you are safe and still farming. This used to be how people played mid, like years ago. I remember there's a famous video of Fear getting 100% CS, like every single last hit, and I think every single deny. I can't remember if that was true.
Wow.
He probably didn't get every single deny, but he had every single CS, and he was playing Quap, and Quap also has one of the best attack animations as far as mid laners go. But his equilibrium was perfect because it basically formed I was going to say concentric circle. I think that's the word for it, outside of the tower attack range.
Okay.
And he kept it there for the first 10 minutes or whatever. And it was just him. Every time he got a CS, he got a deny. And every time the creeps on the enemy team were a little too aggressive, he would auto attack a few times to reset it. And every time his creeps were a little too aggressive, he would aggressively deny, which is where you just deny right when it hits 50% health. You just start denying right away. And that way you are trying to basically help the enemy creeps push into you. And he just held it the entire time. But if you are playing an advantageous matchup and you're doing that nowadays, you're missing out. Because with the addition of the extra creep, you are gaining more from pushing towers early and from forcing the enemy hero to be underneath a tower.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I'm always super worried about pushing. I guess when I'm playing mid, I'm trying to keep it in the middle as possible, and even just, towards my side, just because I'm so worried about pushing and getting regardless of the matchup, I'm always playing safe, which is probably why I lose most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, playing safe will definitely make you tie out lanes, but even when you're playing safe, you still have to acknowledge your windows to be successful. Yeah. So if you're playing safe and you're playing Lina, sure, your matchup's bad, but if you hit 6, you have Laguna Blade. Even a bad matchup, you still have Laguna Blade. Still a good spell. So you still have to focus on, all right, I played safe this whole time, but I now have hit my window, so I'm going to abuse that, and I'm going to get a kill, or I'm going to at least play more aggressively. That's where it gets dangerous. If you have a good matchup, even if you don't play it to its best potential and you just tie it out, sure, you've lost your advantage, but you still farmed, right? And the enemy team farmed, but, whatever. But as long as you tie out a lane at least, you're fine. So I find myself doing that too. Honestly, if I'm playing games and I'm getting complacent and I'm just I've been grinding out my Smurf and it's just agonizingly boring. And so I will play games and I'm just mindlessly, I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and instead of playing properly, I just play safe and farm. And it's not very productive, but, I farm. It's whatever. It's not stressful.
You're listening to a podcast whilst you're playing?
I did on my Smurf because like games are not hard. I never do that if I'm playing ranked on my main account.
Yeah.
But if I am playing on my Smurf, like I play on my Smurf specifically so that I can listen to podcasts because I need to focus on a podcast, but I can't focus on a podcast and play regular Dota. So I'll play like casual games basically and grind this account up slowly. So yeah. So if I'm playing mid and I'm getting complacent, I will just relax and like keep simple equilibrium. Whereas if I was playing well, I would be abusing like a good matchup or something.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, equilibrium is difficult because it's one of those things that's very simple theoretically. It's very simple, like, oh, I just want to keep it in one spot. So if they get an extra creep, I'll aggressively deny. And if I get an extra creep, if I get an extra creep, I'll aggressively deny. And if they get an extra creep, I will aggressively hit that creep and equal it out. But in practice, it becomes incredibly difficult because the enemy team has wave clear and they're spamming you out, or you have wave clear and you're spamming out, and it becomes a real back and forth. So maintaining good equilibrium is the goal. And, it tends to get messy, but you want to, in the long run, be shooting for the goal of either playing aggressively and keeping them under tower, or playing defensively and keeping a nice, even equilibrium where you are closer to your tower.
Okay.
Yeah. I suppose the last thing mechanically that I really want to talk about is trading harass. That's something, if you watch pro games, you'll see right from the get-go, almost regardless of the matchup. You see both mid laners, equilibrium hits, it's usually somewhere in the river. Both mids, immediately, they just trade a bunch of harass, then they place their Iron Branch down, and they tango it. And that's how, like, the first 20 seconds of a lane go in a lot of pro games, very frequently. And essentially, the goal of trading harass, before getting to specifics, the goal of trading harass is to put yourself at a regen advantage and the enemy at a regen deficiency. So this is why commonly, like ideally, obviously in pubs it's not always the case. Ideally, you start the game with some variation of stat items, 2 pooled tangos, and then you ferry out a salve right when you get your rune gold. If you don't have pooled tangos, then what I do, or what people do, is you get whatever your stat item is, like a null talisman or a wraith band, and then you also get a full set of tangos, and then you don't get the salve. Some people still do get the salve, but I usually don't get the salve because 4 tangos is usually enough. Yeah. But if you have the salve, it lets you play very aggressively. Similarly, if the enemy team does not have a salve, then you can play super aggressively on them because oh man, I have hundreds and hundreds of health, more regen than them potentially in my inventory, whereas they only have 2 tangos. Also, pooled tangos have a long cooldown, which is one of the big reasons why double waving is so effective. And why just playing aggressively is so effective in those first few waves is because the pooled tangos, they have a what is it, like a 60-second cooldown, I want to say. It might be longer than that. I honestly can't recall. And so they can't just be chaining tangos like somebody can if they have their own tangos. So that adds an extra element of benefit to playing aggressively.
Okay.
So yeah, trading harass, it also depends, you just have to analyze from the get-go. I'm playing Shadow Fiend. I'm not good at trading harass early, but I'm really good at trading harass later because I have low damage early, but great damage later. Similarly, Invoker. You have great damage once you have a few points in Exort, but you have terrible, terrible damage when you only have 1 point in Exort. So if you're playing like a Quap Invoker matchup, the Quap should be trading with the Invoker early and spamming daggers and dealing as much damage as possible because he has very little offensive potential, and she has much more than him. But then later on, she probably still wins the harass war. But later on, he's much more viable. He's much stronger at trading with the Quap. So that's when the Quap has to play a bit more defensively and not necessarily just eat right clicks.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, like the simplest way to put it is, do you do more damage than the enemy? If yes, initiate harass. If no, only harass if they're put in a bad position. Similarly, look at their items and say, they brought 4 tangos. I only have 2 pooled tangos. I need to play a bit more defensively. But if you're on the other side, you say, all right, I have 4 tangos. Sure, I spent 125 gold and I don't have a couple branches, but they only have 2 pooled. I can bully this person right now because I've doubled their regen.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Analyze how much regen they have and then punish them for having too little, or play defensively because you realize that you do not have enough.
Okay.
Yeah. And all these mechanics kind of intertwine. And like I said, right, the double waving is effective because of pooled tango cooldown and because people don't bring a ton of regen. And salves are really good because, the Lena hit 6, she tried to kill me, she wasted her window, her kill window, and I had a salve still from lane, or from the early part of the laning phase. So I just used my salve. She has no mana now, and now I can bully her. And so these kind of things, they go back and forth and back and forth. And that's where mid gets overly complicated, is because all these things work not really in tandem with one another, because tandem is usually two things, but they work all in one system together.
Yeah, that's really helpful, actually. I've never thought about like the cooldown on tangos and stuff like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's something that it's one of those things where you don't think about it until you're in the position to be like, oh my god, I can't use a tango for 30 seconds. Like, what am I doing? This sucks. I'm miserable. Right? It's always, these elements are always way more obvious when you're playing from the back foot than from when you're playing and you're ahead.
Yeah.
If that, I feel like that's just Dota in general, is that, I don't know if it's just me, but I have a much harder time when I'm playing badly or when I'm behind, rather than I feel much weaker when I'm playing from behind rather than how strong I feel when I'm playing from ahead. If that makes sense. Like, when I'm playing from ahead, I'm like, oh man, this is a good game. But when I'm playing from behind, it's like, oh my god, this is the worst. This sucks. We're gonna lose because my lane is lost. And, like,
everything's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, that was always Proud's joke with me, especially in team practice and stuff, is that when I was playing mid for some iterations of the many teams we've played on together, it would always be like, oh my god, Sam, if Sam's losing his lane, like, because I'm just complaining at the microphone, and I'm like, oh my god, I need rotations, nobody's in my lane from my team, and everybody's in my lane from the enemy team, and it's like, all right, but we're winning all our other lanes, and I'm like, I don't care that you guys are winning your lanes, like, my lane sucks, this is not fun. So, it's very important. Yeah, but you get used to it. That's just your cross to bear when you get me as your mid player.
Actually, that's the thing I've just thought, like, that's something I never do, is I never ask for tangos as a mid player. I just never ask for them. I always buy them.
For tangos?
Yeah, like I don't think I've ever asked for tangos. Ever.
Oh god, yeah. You need to I forget who I was talking to. But mid players are definitely like a special breed in terms of you just have to embrace the personality of a mid player if you want to be a good mid player. Like, if you are not ready to just be like greedy and be kind of a jerk, you are probably not going to be a good mid player in the end, right? It's like some professions in real life. Like, if you're just not the type of person to like agonize over little details, you're probably not going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Like, if you are not the type of person to just be like, hey, I need 2 tangos, give them to me. Or, hey, I need rotations. Like, what are you guys doing? You guys are just not good. Like, I need help. That's not going to... You're probably not going to be a good mid player.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you just have to kind of embrace the role and just say, all right, I'm playing mid. But it's better if you're in a stack, and then you could just be like, hey, I need tangos. Like, can I just have a couple tangos? And then you should get them, unless you're in a really weird stack where people don't give tangos, in which case you should find new friends. But yeah,
so would you say
in pubs you should still get them?
Would you say that you would always ask for tangos? Like, does it depend hero to hero, or do you always go, I'm playing mid, I need tangos, and you wouldn't necessarily buy your own?
If I'm feeling really complacent, like I have been recently, I will not bother. I will just like at the strategy screen, you could buy items.
Yeah.
I will buy, like, let's say I'm playing Lena, I'll buy a null talisman, and then I'll wait and see if somebody gives me tangos. And if nobody gives me tangos, I'll just take the hint and buy my own.
Okay.
But usually people, even if they just give me one, I'll still just figure it out. And I'll just I'll just like get a fairy fire instead of an extra branch or something. And yeah, if I'm feeling like, if I'm in a regular game, I do ask for tangos. And I feel like that has existed for long enough that is trickled down that I feel like the only times I don't get tangos are if I have a jungler and a roamer. Yeah. Because maybe the roamer is just tilted, and because, we have a jungler and they're just tilted and they're like, I don't, like, they just leave. Or maybe they don't like communicate. Like, some people just don't communicate at all. Like, they just, like, we had a bounty hunter on one of my games today, and he just didn't say anything. And one guy was like, hey, can I please have tangos? Like, very polite. He's like, even just one. And the Benny was like, no, I got to go to lane. It's like, oh, okay, I guess so. So yeah, I mean, I would like to have tangos, but sometimes you don't get tangos. You know, it's just life.
Okay. But I should always ask, or at least wait for someone to give me them, rather than being like, I'm buying my own regen.
Yeah, if you're in like solo queue and you don't want to be that guy, you can just like wait and then buy your own if you don't get them. But ideally, you get a couple. And if you do have to buy your own, you just take advantage. Right? Yeah, exactly. There's no harm in asking as long as you're polite.
Yeah.
And also, you can ask. If I do ask, I ask during strategy screen because that's when people can kind of plan for it and all that, compared to once the game has started, and then like suddenly, your 4 that is already at the tier 3 tower trying to get to lane is now doubling back to give you tangos, and it feels like a hassle, and it's a whole process. So yeah, I suppose just to wrap it up, let's talk quickly about items. Because items are complicated and very specific, but the broad strokes of why you're building certain items are pretty simple. Essentially, so the first rule is never, if anybody listens to this podcast and tries to do ridiculous garbage like trying to rush a bottle, I don't know what to tell you. Clearly you do not have the mind, like, that's like maybe the most tilting bad thing that I see people do is do utter nonsense. Like start, like even if you random a hero, you have, 825 gold. Do not start bottle. Do not start bottle unless you're Zeus. Zeus, maybe. I'll like give you a pass if you do it on Zeus. But you should never start bottle or say I'm rushing bottle, right? Like, you don't want to do any kind of garbage where you start like circlet and 2 branches and 2 pooled tangos and then say, yeah, I'm rushing a bottle. Never. Don't do that. Because bottle is useful once you have spells that deal actual damage. Also, more importantly, in the early laning phase, you are neck and neck damage-wise with your opponent. Odds are, unless you're playing like Treant Protector mid and you deal 90 damage, you are going to be very close damage-wise to the opponent. And you want to equal out, or you want to take advantage of your ability to get damage early through virtue of stats. So that's why the most common items are, if you're a int mid, usually you're starting null and 3 branches, or sometimes, not really anymore, people used to do null, 1 branch fairy fire, or again, if you don't get tangos, then you go null and a set of tangos. Similarly, if you're playing an agi mid, like a sniper or a viper, you are going Wraithband, one fairy fire, and 1 iron branch, or you're going Wraithband plus tango. Those are the 2 things. If you're playing a strength mid, it's very uncommon, so that's kind of different. And if you're playing a melee mid, you're usually going PMS. Like if you're playing Ember, you usually go Poor Man's Shield and then a fairy fire and a branch. Or you go fairy fire or you go Poor Man's Shield and a set of tangos. Because if you're playing melee mid, you just need that. And also it gives you 6 damage from the Poor Man's Shield. Unless you're like a Timbersaw, in which case, you just gotta suck it up and not get the plus damage. But yeah, essentially all the mid items, all these starting items that you're building are some combination of regen and stats to deal more damage. And you might say, oh, well, if I don't build a Wraithband, I'm only 9 damage behind. It's not a big deal. Like, 9 damage is a tremendous difference in the laning phase. That's like a quarter of your damage, or a quarter is probably an exaggeration. 9 damage a lot of times will be like a fifth or a sixth of your damage for the first few waves. And like we've talked about earlier, if you lose the first few waves through any number of reasons, you have potentially lost the entire lane.
Yeah.
Like, remember our Teach Me Tuesday where I went on the rant about not stealing bottle?
Yes.
The whole stealing bottle rules, or stealing courier to get bottle, the whole point behind not stealing bottle, courier with bottle, is that if you lose 3 waves, you've lost the lane, potentially. Mm-hmm. So if you don't buy a Wraithband, the enemy mid buys a Wraithband, they gain 9 damage, you don't gain 9 damage. Suddenly you miss, let's say, 4 last hits because they get a deny and you don't. Or rather, they get a deny instead of you getting a CS. you have to play defensively. They trade with you better because now they have more damage. It just puts you on a back foot entirely.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of times you'll see mids like Puck and Necrophos that also build Veil. They will build 2 nulls before getting boots or before getting bottle, because the early laning phase is tremendously about just pure auto attack damage. So yeah, like the broad strokes, regardless of specifics hero wise, is you want to be building items that give you regen. If you're melee, you want to build a poor man's shield, and if you are, and yeah, you want to just be building a damage item, which is usually a null or a wraith band, and in rare occasion, like I said, a poor man's shield. And then either you get a set of tangos, or you build a couple branches, which you then use to make your pooled tangos better. Those are essentially the broad strokes. And then you get your bottle as soon as possible. Sometimes people prefer to get like a second null, like I said, to further their damage advantage over the opponent. But in general, I just get a bottle as soon as possible. If I have bought my own tangos, like I said, I don't build a salve right with the gold from the starting rune. So then I'm a little closer to my bottle. But if I do have 2 pulled tangos, then I ferry out a salve, which allows me to trade better with the opponent, especially nowadays in the days of heavy rotations. I can generally assume I'm going to get rotated on and tried to kill. So if I don't die, then I suddenly have a salve and I just regen and I'm fine. Especially since you don't have your shrine until level 5. Or until minute 5, rather.
So I have a specific Death Prophet question.
Okay.
So like the standard kind of taught guide says that your starting item should be a null talisman and 2 fairy fires.
That's wrong.
But okay.
It's not tremendously wrong. 2 fairy fires is overkill.
Like I'm wondering, am I also supposed to have like pulled tangos on top of that?
Absolutely. That is operated. That build is operating on the assumption that you have 2 pulled tangos.
All right. Well, that would explain a lot of things, because I have never asked for tangos, and I've always just bought. Like sometimes I'll just buy a null and will have bought myself tangos, because I'm like, fairy fires, like they seem okay, but I don't really see why I would get that instead of tangos. But this is based off the assumption that I have 2 tangos from whoever has given me them. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I've just been going to lane with a null and 2 fairy fires, or a null and tangos, because I'm like, what's the point of me getting 2 fairy fires? Like I have to get stuff sent out to me because I can't stay in lane. Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah. I hesitate to flame Tortellini because he does a lot of good work, but some of his builds are definitely wrong, or dated, and that's probably a pretty good example. Like people used to, I'm trying to remember, people used to be more into fairy fires. Like people for a while, even on so since null talisman costs less than a wraith band, you can actually get. What is it? You can get 3 branches, which is 3 stats, which is, of course, 3 damage, and, of course, 33 mana and 60 health. But if you build a Wraith Band, you can't afford 3 branches, so you're better off building 1 branch and a Fairy Fire, just value-wise, because the Fairy Fire is 2 damage. Mm-hmm. But, I would never start Null 2 Fairy Fire, just because I want to have sustained regen from tangos rather than burst regen from fairy fires. Yeah. Fairy fires also have a cooldown, so like you can't use 2 fairy fires in 1 engagement. Odds are you can't use 2 fairy fires in 1 engagement, unless you're dying to dot damage or some nonsense like that. So not to flame Tortellini, but that build is definitely wrong. And it's not like super wrong, but that is dangerous from that perspective of if somebody reads that and just follows it like a Bible, you need to realize, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Basically, that's the point with all guides, including our own guides. Like, if something feels wrong, don't do it.
Which is why I've been buying my own instead. But that's kind of silly, because I don't know why it's never occurred to me to ask for them. I have no idea. I guess it's just because I don't play mid, but like I constantly
giving tangos.
I'd say I'm constantly giving tangos, but I don't know why I've never asked for them myself. Like that explains so much.
Yeah,
and it's really dumb. I've only had that realization now that I'm just like, I never asked for tangos.
Yeah.
My god.
That'll make a world of difference, it turns out.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, regen's really big in the mid lane because it is like it's a game of inches, right? Where if you are 100 HP over the enemy, that means you have kill potential and they don't potentially.
Yeah.
Or if you have two tangos and they have four, they have hundreds more health to work with rather than you. So yeah, I mean it makes all the difference in the world having those tangos. So yeah, definitely either start with tangos, to start with at least two tangos, whether that means two pooled tangos or four bought tangos. Yeah. I mean, other mid items, I don't know. Other mid items are very like hero specific. So I won't even get too deeply into those, but essentially just build a stat item like a null or a wraith band, build regen items, and then build your bottle, and then get your boots of choice. That's generally my my checklist. Some matchups you want boots before bottle, but in general I would rather have bottle than boots. The only times where I build boots instead of bottle would be like if I'm a melee hero and I'm against some really bad matchup like a Death Prophet or like an OD or something, or maybe a Razor. Or rather, if I am a Razor and my mechanic is that I'm fast and I have to keep up with people, then, it's pretty good. But in general, I would rather have a bottle than boots. So yeah, that's really all I got. Obviously, mid is very complicated, but I just want to cover the broad strokes. And after 90 minutes, I think we covered most of them.
Yeah, this helps a lot. I can't believe I've had like a revelation of this. Why I never buy, I never ask for tangos. It's just, I feel like an idiot now.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've definitely had those moments with other things. Like my segment I've been pitching to Proud for like a month at this point is to do a segment for Theorycraft Thursday about moments where we realize we're terrible, but we just haven't done it yet. And definitely, like every once in a while, you just have one of those moments where you're just like, man, I just never use my quelling blade to break out of Nature's Prophet trees or something like that. And it's like, wow, I could have been doing that forever, but I just didn't. Yeah. So yeah, it's the little things that matter. That's really that's the crux of mid. To wrap this all up, I'd say in like one sentence, it's that it's all about the little things. Rather than worrying about the grand scheme of the game, you just got to worry about your lane, and you got to worry about the little things like windows and like regen and like whether you have damage over them or not, and whether the creeps are in their best position or their worst position. You just gotta think through the little things one at a time, and then kind of coalesce all those elements and all that knowledge into a one lane if you're in an advantageous matchup, or a tied lane if you are in a neutral matchup or a bad matchup. Yeah, and just figure it out. A lot of it is just experience. Okay, like mid is a lot of theory to it, but mid also is you just got to play mid and you will figure it out. Mid definitely is super easy to practice with your friends. You can just, unless like it's not very productive. I mean, it's somewhat productive even if the other person's way better than you. It's generally not productive if they're way worse than you. Like it's good for them, but it's not really good for you to play against worse players because like you just get lazy, like myself as a good example. Like that's why I had that problem, like using that TA Ember matchup that I was talking about earlier. Like I play disadvantageous matchups aggressively sometimes because I'm just like, oh, I play a ton of TA, like I'm super good, and then I'm not, and then I just feed. So be very careful about that. Okay, that's all I got. I think.
So do you have some homework for me?
Oh, sure. Let's see. Okay, so homework for you, I would say I would like you to find somebody at a similar MMR than you, or at least similar skill level since you don't have a ranked MMR, and just play a bunch of matchups and just see how they go. And then, like, let's say you start off, don't play 1v1s, because 1v1s, we were talking about this before the show, but 1v1, like, mirror matchups have a lot of weird elements to them. But yeah, find somebody and play matchups with them, and play them like you would in a real game. Don't try to meta game and be like, oh yeah, I built 4 Wraith Bands so that I can win. Play games like a real game, and you can basically accelerate your growth as a mechanical mid player by doing that. Instead of playing an actual full game, you can play three 1v1 mids with a friend. And you just play like the first 8 minutes or whatever. Okay. Yeah, so do that. Or, I mean, if you have the time, just play actual games and just play mid. But mid can be hard to practice because you do, like, people just instantly lock it or whatever, or people rage when you try to instantly lock it. So, practice with a friend, first off, and take note of, like, you don't need to actually take, like, results notes, but take note of, like, all right, I just played the Death Prophet versus DK matchup 3 times. Maybe now let's try out the Death Prophet versus Lina matchup, or, the Lina versus Sniper matchup. Like, try all the different things. Play both good matchups and bad matchups, and note why you won and why you lost. And when you're practicing mid with somebody, talk about what felt good and what felt bad from both perspectives. So if they're double waving you, say like, oh man, that was really hard to play against. And then that will promote in their mind the idea of, oh man, this was a good mechanic that I have been doing well. Similarly, if you do something, you want them to tell you, oh man, it was really cool how, like, you would single hit my range creep and then use a Dragon Slave so that I couldn't deny it. Like, that kind of stuff is very important. So yeah. Also, that's like the one last tip is, which I forgot. It didn't come to mind until right now, but if you're playing a spammy hero like a Lina or an OD, know how much damage your spells do, and don't miss creep waves. Don't miss creeps because of it. Yeah. Frequently, the easiest way to abuse a bad mid player is because they're going to be spamming out their level 5 nukes, or their third level of nuke that they get at level 5. Then you can deny your range creep every single wave, and then they lose the entire lane because they just aren't mid players. So if you have level 3 nukes on like an OD or a Lina, know that you have to hit your the enemy range creep first before nuking it. Similarly, know that the enemy team has to do that. So you can both get a ton of easy denies in matchups because the enemy team does not attentively do that. And similarly, you can assure the enemy team is not denying the range creeps if you pay attention and do that yourself. So yeah, that's a small tip.
Okay.
All right. So let's do our plugs, shall we?
Great.
So our plugs, let's see. Well, so all the Fourth Spirit changes don't happen until November 1st. November 1st is, of course, patch date, but that's like our full transitory, is that the right word? Transitionary date. You can find us already, like we just have a placeholder up, but fourthspirit.com, that will be our website. We have it up at the moment with, basically nothing there, but we have our logo there, and the logo is super nice. B did an excellent job. We're all thrilled with the logo. We will be converting the .p Discord, so you don't need to find a new Discord. You can, we're also looking into what other accounts we can transition over. So potentially we're going to be transitioning the Patreon. We need to look into the specifics on that, because obviously there's money involved. So we'll likely be transitioning the Patreon over. You can Twitter. We're going to be converting the .p_show Twitter over to a Fourth Spirit Twitter, so we don't need to plug that. Everything is in the swing of change, and we're looking forward to it. So yeah, look for that November 1st. Obviously, the patch is going to be very exciting. You'll find a full patch notes review from myself and Proud out ASAP as soon as we get it done recording, once we see the patch notes. So yeah, I'm at Ursinity on Twitter. Beedub is at Beedub, AYUP Beedub. And the show Twitter is at @p_show, which will eventually be converted to @Fourth Spirit. And yeah, that's that, I think. Thanks for being here for the last 93 minutes. This got a little large.
Yeah, this went long. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so hard because like every comment you make and every little point has like 3 branching points after it. That's the Dota problem.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's true.
That's been mid lane in 90 minutes. We'll probably be talking more about this. If you have any mid lane specific questions, DM me on Twitter or on what's it called, that thing that we use, Discord, or just ask, ping me wherever. You don't need to DM me. Make it public. Who cares? Anyway, thanks for listening. And this has been, of course, well, it's not our theory. Actually, this is not Theorycraft Thursday. This has been Teach Me Tuesday. We've all learned a little bit about ourselves, a little about each other, and a little bit about Dota 2, hopefully. So I'll see everybody next week.